Morning VC, happy Easter. Steve Whitty here, and first of really of a new series. I'm going to look at reviewing albums, particular favourites of mine, or just looking through them. Maybe review's not quite the best word, but hey, that's all I could think of at the time. So the first album I'm coming to look at, and if I just bear with me, I'll just go and get it. Nothing like being prepared. It's Black Rose, a rock legend by Lizzy. Now, this was the ninth album. Refer to my notes here. It was released on the 13th of April 1979. The lineup at this point had changed. Brian Robertson had finally left the band and had been replaced by Gary Moore. I think this Gary Moore had previously played in an earlier incarnation of Thin Lizzy, one of the early lineups, briefly to replace Eric Bell. The album itself was recorded between December 1978 and February 1979, and it was recorded in two studios. You had the majority of the recording took place at the Pathy Marconi EMI studios in Paris, and there's one track that was recorded at the Good Earth studio in London. The album was produced jointly by Tony Visconti and Thin Lizzy, and this is the second album that Visconti had been involved with. He was involved with Bad Reputation, the second studio album that he was involved with. This album reflected Thin Lizzy at their peak. They'd just come off the success of Live and Dangerous, having hit singles. Commercially, they were doing very little wrong at that point. It's in a way, this album signified the start of the beginning of the end for the band, and probably signified the beginning of the end for Phil Lynott himself. The album debuted, reached number 2 in the UK. It debuted at number 2, it's the highest it reached. There were 3 hit singles off the album. I'll go through them once I go through each track by track. So, the first track off the album is Do Anything You Want to Do, which was the second single. This is a Phil Lynott song. It's a very, very drum-heavy song. Really a good single. Actually, it is a good single. I think a bit of an up your statement by Lynott. You can do anything you want to do. Sort of timed in with the punk ethos. He mixed well with the punk crowd. I think. He could see what was going on there, and they liked that. He liked him, particularly Steve Jones, Paul Cook. I think particularly got on well with him. So that was all right. So that was their first single. Second track on the album is Toughest Street in Town. Now this is co-written by Scott Gorham, Phil Lynott, and Gary Moore. It's just what it is. It's just a bit of a rocker. Toughest Street in Town. Yeah. Good track. The third track on the album is S&M, which was written by Phil Lynott and Brian Downey. All the band had a credit somewhere on the album. As the title says, it's about kinky sex, and you can hear some screams in the background going on. This was the B-side to Do Anything You Want to Do. Not a bad track, but it's not the greatest track in the world, but it's not the worst track in the world. The fourth track on the album, it was the first single, Waiting for an Alibi, and it is by far the best track on the album. It just shows off the dueling guitars at the end between Gary Moore and Scott Gorham. The song was a Phil Lynott song. One of Phil Lynnott's, I think, strengths as a songwriter was he could tell a story, and this again is just a great piece of storytelling. it sort of was the song, you know, released its first single. It sort of showcased what the album was going to be, and by far, I think one of the best singles they ever produced. Final track on side one was Sarah, and this was a co-write between Phil Lynott and Gary Moore. This was written about Phil Lynnott's new daughter, his first child, Sarah. But this is not the first track that he wrote called Sarah. On Shades of a Blue Orphanage, there is another song, totally different song called Sarah, and this was written about his paternal grandmother, and she brought him up as a child in Dublin. His mum still lived in England, and because he was born illegitimate, it was deemed safer to raise him with a family unit with his grandparents, and I think it's a lot of love influence. I think the grandparents' influence showed on, particularly on Phil's early life. So that's side one. On side two, it opens with "Got to Give It Up." This was the B-side to. This was a US only single, but it was also the B-side to Sarah. This was written by Phil Lynott and Scott Gorham. This track, I think, sort of precurses the end. During recording of Black Rose, particularly in Paris, heavy drugs really kicked in, particularly heroin had started to kick in. And it really took a grip on Phil Lynott and Scott Gorham. Fortunately, Scott Gorham, he was able to kick the habit after Finley's initially split up in 1983. Unfortunately for Phil Lynott, he could never quite let go, and eventually led to his early death in January 1986. It sounds very prophetic now when you listen to it. I suspect when you listen to it, if you listen to it in 1979, it was just a song, but now it has a bit of a deeper meaning. Track two on side two is "Get Out of Here." Now this is a co-written by Phil Lynott and Midge Ure. This is Midge Ure just about during Ultravox. Midge Ure, as I mentioned earlier, Phil Lynott got well with the punk and the white crowd, and also Midge Ure was involved in that. He in fact formed a band with Glenn Matlock of the ex of the Sex Pistols called Rich Kids. Had one album, okay-ish, but they soon split up pretty much after that. And so he co-wrote this song for Phil Lynott. Midge Ure had to, when Gary Moore and Phil Lynott fell out, and on the eve of the American tour, it was Midge Ure that Phil Lynott called to learn out and to be the next guitarist. Now at that point, he looked nothing like your long-haired rocker. He was very much into got new weight clothing, short hair. But he tells this tale of having to learn. He thought, I'm going to learn the guitar parts while on the flight to America. Unfortunately for him, they booked him on Concorde, so they got him there a bit too quick for him to learn the song. They managed to escape through, but it was one of the misfortunes that Thin Lizzy had when trying to break America, whether it be Brian Robertson injuring his hand or whatever. Their attempts to break America were always doomed to failure. Third track is "With Love," and this is written by Phil Lynott. Now, this was the B-side to "Gotta Give It Up." Now, this was the song that was recorded in London, and the credit on the album is Tony Visconti and Phil Lynott. Now, this is probably the weakest song on the album, and to be honest, I suspect this was an album. This was a throwaway track that he got spare from recording his solo album, Solo in Soho. It's not the greatest song that he ever written. I think it is the weakest song. It's okay, but it's not really matched up to the rest of the album. The final track on the album is probably the title track. Well, it's called "Russian Dub," which is Gaelic for Black Rose, a rock legend. Now, this is co-written by Phil Lynott and Gary Moore, and it's a mashup of stuff that Gary Moore and Phil Lynott had written, but some traditional tunes that they arranged. So you got in 4 parts Shenandoah, which was Lynott and Gary Moore. Then you've got Will You Go, Lassie Go. Now, it's on the album as credited to F. McPeak, but it's actually written by William McPeak. Then you hear a bit of Danny Boy, which is arranged by Lynott and Moore, and then the Masons' Apron. And it's sort of a homage to all things. It's about Ireland. This is one that felt Lynnett's strength, even though he couldn't wait to get out of the place. Let's be frank. When Whiskey in the Jar hit, he was out. He was out, and he was living in London. His heart always was back in Ireland, and he would, use the imagery of Ireland in his songs, and this it sort of highlights that. On the actual album, it's another great example of dueling guitars. Now, years ago, I had one of these Amstrad stereos. Now, Amstrad, Alan Sugar trading. Their stereos, we know not for quality, but with a lot of flashing lights, and there's particularly bit where you hear one guitar do its piece, and the light on the left hand side would go up, and then the other guitar would do its piece, and the lights on the right hand side channel would go up, and then when they come together, they just come together. It looked spectacular. It sounded rubbish, but on that stereo, but it was good. And then towards the end of the song, Phil Lynott sort of name checks a load of used a lot of punnery to name check a load of Irish writers. So Van der Man, Bernard, Brendan Wavy Bean. But Georgie, you're the best. So he was a big Man United fan as well. So George Best got mentioned in there. And that completed the album. It's a really good album. Now, there are some other musicians that appeared on the album. Jimmy Bain, the ex-Rainbow bass player, he played bass on With Love, and he's just about the point where he got together with Brian Robertson to form Wild Horses. Huey Lewis, he of the News, at the late 70s, he was based a lot in London in a band called Clover. He played harmonica on Sarah and With Love. And Mark Nassif played drums on Sarah. Don't know whether Brian Downey was not available at the time and they needed a drummer. Mark Nassif played with Ian Gillan band at one point. As I mentioned, this was a turning point for the group. The drugs had kicked in, and this was pretty much their commercial peak. Gary Moore was eventually replaced by Snowy White, who, however a fine guitarist he was, didn't really fit in with the image, and the tunes started to wave and the sales started to go, and Phil Lynott kept on partying, and I don't think really saw the wood for the trees. And I think the reason they split up in '83 was really to try and save their health. As Scott Gorham, yes, it worked. Phil Lynott, no, it was just too late for him. So that's the album. But before I close the video, I'd like to mention, wrong book. Cowboy Song, authorised biography of Philip Lynott by Graham Thompson. It's authorised by Edward family, particularly Caroline, his ex-wife. Fascinating book, particularly about him growing up in Ireland. It must have been hard for him to be illegitimate, but then black as well. But it sort of shaped his career, and it's a good read. I'd recommend the book. So that's the end of the video. So I'll be interested to hear what you think. Leave comments below, and I'll reply to everyone. If you're happy, liked what you've seen, you want to subscribe, hit the subscribe button. Enjoy the rest of your Easter weekend. Until the next video, take care.